Is there a mindset or belief that you have about story crafting that others don't have?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So, if I talk about story building and storytelling, struggle, search, solution, I look at story crafting as three pieces as well.
Okay.
And storytelling is the third component. And people, so much in our world is like, oh, Patrick, how do you do storytelling? It's like, back up. First phase of good storytelling is what I call story sourcing.
Mm.
And source good stories. You have to realize when you're in a story. That's key. And then if you walk around with a sense that you're in stories, you'll be a much better storyteller.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Meaningful Revolution podcast, the podcast where we help you live more into a life that you've designed so that you feel more purposeful, more confident, and more happy. Today, I'm with a very special guest who is an author, international speaker, world-class business advisor, certified high-performance coach, U.S. patent holder in analytics, a teacher, husband, father, and granddaddy. He spent his life helping individuals, teams, and organizations get from point A to point B, working with a very successful career at Accenture, with energy, momentum, and success, and with energy, momentum, and achieving success. He helps organizations with that. That said, I'd love to welcome Patrick Mosher. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm really excited that you're here, man.
My pleasure. It's so great to be here, and I even like the name, the Meaningful podcast. So let's dive in and have some meaningful conversation and help people out there do what they need to do with their lives. So let's get it on.
All right. So today's topic is very nebulous. I know, Patrick, you're a storyteller. You talk a lot about, you have a program about significant impact, and we can maybe get into that a little bit more later. But living with purpose and telling stories, which is an ancient human technology and art form. I'd love to start there. So, could you tell us maybe a little bit about your journey on being a storyteller, and how you got
So
to
good.
take it, getting into that type of world?
Yeah, it's so good. So I'd say in some ways, I've been telling stories for a long time. Um, and the power of stories is so relevant. And we know this from, ancient religious texts, parables and stories. And the thing about stories is that they carry wisdom. I think of stories as wisdom packets or bottled wisdom. And so I think that's the beauty of stories. Doing a little bit of research, and I teach a story crafting class here at the university I'm teaching at Purdue, and one of the things that came up, yeah, like boiler up, let's go, is stories. They gave this is a very old research, and pardon me if I don't have the exact details. I don't have the details in front of me, but you get the drift of this thing. Is that they gave students, like, they'll just say 12 words to memorize, a series of words to memorize. And they said, memorize these words. And then they gave group B, 12 words to memorize. But they said, put it in a story and memorize the story. And what they did, they said, in the immediate recall, both A and B groups recalled at the same retention level. It's like, okay, great. Later, let's just say a month later, they asked them again. And the difference was like 12% of the A remembered and like 90% of the B remembered the words. The point of this is that, man, if you have something important to tell the world, if you package it in a story, it'll be memorable. And so how is that useful to you, to the people out there, your listeners? being memorable. Okay, we all want to be memorable in some ways. I get that. But let me give you another mini story of that. When I was at Accenture, I was there for 28.5 years. I At the end of my career, I would be an orals coach. Orals are where you package a proposal to a client and then you pitch. And usually they have like 2 or 3 competitors pitching for the same big piece of work. And so typically when partners would go in and coach a team before they go into these big orals presentations, they can be like 2 hours long. The first thing that most executives would ask for, these coaches would ask for, is like, show me the deck, show me the PowerPoint deck. And, well, the color's off, or the flow's not right, or you didn't pack in this information. The first question I would ask everybody who was going to show up from our team into the room is like, what 3 stories will you tell? And they're like, we didn't prepare that. What do you mean? What are the 3 stories? And this is where I would tell people, I would tell the teams, look, clients don't buy companies. They buy the people in the room. And when they want to buy the people in the room, they want to hear how they've got a monkey on their back and the people in the room can take that monkey and put it on their back for them. Man, that's persuasion. So, if you think about an executive and you've got a $20 million pitch and they're going like, I get this 20 million gorilla on my back. They want to make sure that these 3, 7, or 8 people that you take into that room, that they know how to take that gorilla and put it on their back. And you know what? That comes through in a story. So you tell a story of like, and it's not like, well, I have all these credentials with my background. It's like, let me tell you a story of how this one client, they were facing this problem. And that's a problem that they're facing. And man, this is what we did. It was huge. And it's as big as the gorilla on their back. And they go, this is what we did. And they go like, okay, we need to do those things. And then this is what the success was in the end. And like, I want that. And then you sell the work. So I just explained it in terms of selling work, but do it in terms of selling a workshop, whatever it is. It's like, what's the story you tell? And how does that pull your audience in? So the power of stories is, I believe, one of the most persuasive tools that we have as human beings. And we love stories. We love stories. We love to listen to stories. Okay, I could go on and on. I should stop there. That's a nice snippet for you. But where do you want to go from there? I love stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to put a loose number, of course, not having it in front of me, like, if we think about industries based around stories, like how many billions of dollars does Hollywood come in and bring in, because, or any type of movie, or Bollywood, all of that, and it's just storytelling with different elements attached to it. Hopefully not the same story over and over again. Like the sequels get a little,
yeah,
it's still good. It's still good, but
oh, it is good. It's interesting you brought in movies. I'm gonna go down that path a little bit. So yesterday I was so geeking out on this. I got to go into the performing arts building, the visual and performing arts building here at Purdue, and teach a class on musical theater.
Oh, cool.
And it was interesting because 40 years ago, I took a class in musical theater here. They didn't have the building back then. There's a beautiful building for that these days. But I got to go in the building, and I walked through the doors of this big, beautiful building, and I was tingling. Because like, oh, this is going to be so good. And so I was guest lecturing for a professor, guest lecturing. There's 3 students in this class. So it wasn't a huge class. But I was like, this is going to be so good. And I walked in and I was going to teach them about story crafting. I call it story crafting. I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. Why I think it's important to think about story crafting instead of just storytelling. But I was like, what am I going to teach them? I'm going to go. And I thought about this, and I had just watched the beginning of a new movie that just came out Thursday. I love movies. I think you do too.
Yeah.
And so what happened with this movie, and I I was recognizing this and taught this in the class. It's like when a movie opens, you get the credits of the production companies. I get that. But you get that. But then the first thing that hits you in this story is music.
Mm-hmm.
It's ominous music. It's like a string violin. Horror movies have their own kind of vibe coming into those. Rom-coms have their own kind of happy, light music coming into it. But there's this music that puts you in a tone. It puts you in a place. I was like, what? And because I teach story crafting, I was like, wow, that's so powerful. Before the movie even starts, sound is starting to put you in a place. And then this particular movie opens up, and you hear a sound, and you hear this whoosh, whoosh. And so in my brain, I'm starting to form, oh, we're on an ocean. Because these were, this, and it's like, oh, and there's this gentle, I was like, oh, and as the camera, tunes in on the scene, it's actually snow, and what you're hearing are cars going by with slush.
Okay.
And it's like, so purposeful, because what the whole point of this was, it's disruptive. Something has been, disruptive. And then they pan back to, I don't know if I want to ruin the first brother, a very famous actress who we all know. And so you go like, oh, she's in this movie. And then they pan further back, she's in a wheelchair. It's like, okay, this is, so and the whole movie is about disruption. It's about how expectations are broken. And I was like, they got me in the first 48 seconds of this thing, and they didn't say a word.
Yeah.
I was like, powerful stuff. So think about that when you tell your stories. How do you set things up? I'm going to go on this, Sean. So
go for it. Yeah, I love this.
Here's another story. So to go with that, just to show the power of an opening, of setting a tone, I got asked to address 400 sellers from all over the world at a large company. This was their global sales meeting, and they have it every other year. And so I got asked to do a keynote there. And so I was sitting at one of the, you can imagine a conference room or a hotel room, and there's like these tables of 5 in this large conference room, raised stage, all the lights and the heavy lights, and they got camera guys in the back, all that kind of stuff, all this like major, like this is a major production. I mean, companies spend millions on these kind of meetings. And so I did this keynote, and so I'm sitting at a front table, and they tell me, this is where you are in the agenda. Here's this thing what's going to happen. Then you're going to be next. I was like, okay. So I did that thing. Now, for me, people always think, oh, you're such a natural speaker. Oh, you're so good at it. It's like, oh, heck no. My nerves are like, off the chart, and everything like that. And I go, and then they announce my name over the speaker. And, nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows me from a hole in a wall, because I'm not a public figure. I'm not Tony Robbins or something like that.
Right.
But everybody's like, it's the polite, but it's sellers, right? So they're very enthusiastic. So they're like, yay! And so 450 people, applaud. And I walk over to the raised stage, walk up to the stage, and I walk to the back of the stage, on the back corner, kind of in the dark. And I just look at the crowd. And the clapping was like, and then everybody stopped, and I waited till you could hear a pin drop. And I walked forward to the front of the stage, and I said, have you ever looked a chief executive officer in the eyes at the end of a proposal meeting, and you knew you weren't going to win?
Wow.
That was me. We had 8 minutes left, and we won the work. I want to share with you how that was done. And I said it in about that level of a voice. And now you could go, people going like, I need to hear from this guy. Now, I set the stage. I put them in a room with the CEO, and I put them in a place of saying they've all been there, of like,
Mhm.
that awkward silence, that moment where you go like, this isn't gonna work. They all knew that place. So part of this is like, how do you set the tone in the very first 30 seconds? How do you get people wrapped up and pull them in to the story and want to know what's next? So powerful. Okay, so that stories. This is I've been looking at this for a long time.
Mhm.
You asked how I got into this. Uh, I don't know. My favorite story growing up, maybe that was it. Um, I remember growing up, my favorite story is The Little Engine That Could. I think I can. I think I can. I remember saying that over and over. So maybe that's when I first got into stories. I don't know. Uh, but I think I started recognizing the power of the story itself, not in the story, but like looking at, wow, wait a minute, stories matter, and started using them in the work that I did.
Hmm.
So I think it started back when I was a kid. Maybe the first book that was opened and read a story to me, but I carried that throughout because I love how engaging a good story is.
Mhm.
So,
Right on.
so that's my long story about storytelling.
Okay, so I have a couple of follow up questions. I do want to mention, since you mentioned The Little Engine That Could, my favorite book growing up that really I found was really engaging was there's a monster at the end of this book with
Okay,
about
yeah,
Cookie
oh, go good.
Monster, where he's like so worried about the monster being at the end of the book, and then he realizes at the spoiler alert at the end that he's the monster, like, and then it's all cool, but um, that set of suspense that builds up through that story. Even as a little kid, I was like, oh, this is like so funny and so exciting, and then like, oh, I have that magical moment of the first time hearing it and realizing that like the flip at the end that like, oh, you got worried about nothing, which I think is the lesson of it. It's something that I think about all the time. Like, how am I the monster at the end of this book? Like
Like, how old were you when you first heard that? Like, guess about.
3 or 4.
Okay, 3 or 4. So here's this. First of all, what I love about that is, well, they ruined the end of that story. They told you the end of the story at the beginning in the title of the thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh no, that creates suspense. That's so good. And then here's a story you heard when you were 3 or 4 years old. And again, looking at you, but also looking at your, whoever's listening and watching this, it's like, how often have you been the monster at the end of your story? I mean, yeah, that happened yesterday.
Yeah.
It happened today. And it's like, man, that story lasts forever. The
Mhm.
good ones do. The good ones are just imprinted on your soul. Oh, that's so good. So yes.
Awesome. Yeah. They really are, and we could probably do a whole podcast just on the important stories. But this transitions really nicely, I think, into the next question that I'm curious about. And what would you say is the most important story you've had to tell so far, knowing your business and the wisdom council work that you do? We can talk about that too. There's so many things we
Yeah.
could talk about, but
Yeah.
is there like one story where you're like, oh, this was a lot on the line, personally, work-wise,
Yes.
whatever that was meaningful to you, and what happened?
Yes. That's great. I'd call this a two-part story. There's two stories that maybe call this 2 chapters or 2 parts of a
Okay.
story. So I'll give you the first part of the story, and then we'll see if we do the second part.
Okay.
But I just told the story yesterday when I was teaching the story crafting class to these music students, these musical theater students. So, and here's the story. I'm not going to tell you about the story. I'm just going to tell you the story.
Yeah. Yes.
So I was walking down the hall and in high school, and on the right, there's the classrooms, and on the left, there's the lockers. And it was a change of class. And so I was in an all Catholic boys high school. And so the halls are crowded with everybody changing classes, going to places. And as I'm walking, I'm invisible to people. People are bumping into me. I wouldn't say, they were knocking the books out of my hand, because nobody was mean or bullying, but I just was invisible. And literally 2 guys walking down the hall, they didn't like move because I existed. They just walked right through me.
Wow.
And it's just like, so I was literally just like invisible to people. So I'm walking through the hall and I'm getting bumped right and left. And again, nobody was being purposely mean. I wasn't there. I just wasn't there. And I had a mantra in those days. I said, I have an invisible strength. Invisible strength. There's this invisible strength. They can't see it. I have an invisible strength. And I walked down those halls. And I realized that invisible strength was just the lie I was telling myself. That to keep myself from crying, from an outburst of anger, to anything, just to say, I'm here, let me be seen. I never did that in high school, never did. And so imagine that's the change of every class, is that invisibility and the lie. So that's the first part of the story. Second part of that story is in this all men's school. It was a college prep school, and academics were huge at the school. Of I think 286 high school students that graduated my class, 1 didn't go to college.
Wow.
2 of the people I graduated with scored perfect SAT scores, 1600s, English and math, both. I mean, these were brilliant people. And I got really good grades. Our report cards every quarter were reported in 4 significant digits. So your cumulative is 94.6235. Your semester grade is this, and you had A plus, A minus, all the way down, and those are worth points and all this kind of stuff. And then also on it was your rank, your quarter rank and your cumulative rank. I mean, this is hugely competitive. I don't even know if that's legal these days. But throughout my high school, with this invisible strength, what I did have is I knew how to work hard. I wasn't the smartest kid in the room, but I worked harder than anybody else. And so I remember the 4th quarter of my senior year, I went from 7th to 6th in the rank. And I remember it was Dave Linneman. Dave was 6th, I was 7th. Dave, if you're out there, 45 years, 50 years, sorry. But I got him on the second semester, the 4th quarter of the last year, and I ranked 6th in there. That year, our high school was ranked 7th in the country.
Wow.
In academics. So, I took AP everything, AP Calc, AP Chemistry, AP English, AP whatever. And so theoretically speaking, I was one of the top 50 students that graduated from high school that year.
Wow.
However, I was terrible at standardized tests, SATs, ACTs, that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say terrible. I was comparatively mediocre. I wouldn't even say mediocre. I was comparatively average.
Okay.
But these guys that got 1600s and stuff, there were a lot of those guys. And they would get consistent Bs because they didn't work hard. I don't know if you know the types, but they're really smart. They don't work hard. They get Bs. They were getting literally 4-year scholarships to Yale, Harvard, Stanford. It was like the school said, well, we don't really care about grades that much. We really care about these standardized tests. And I didn't get any scholarships anywhere. I mean, there's like the list of scholarships was just filled the page. Like, everybody had scholarships. I didn't get any. And that's when I realized that invisible strength was a lie. Getting good grades was a lie. It's not going to propel me into life. Now, that may or may not be true, but wow. And what I had given up for those good grades was any bit of social awareness, any kind of communication skills. I was an introvert. I was a wallflower, and I couldn't talk to anybody unless I was in my cocoon of safety. And so I graduated that year, came to Purdue, studying chemical engineering. And I promised myself that in these new digs Shauna, this is like yesterday. I can remember this. I was like, I got here and I was like, I don't have to be that person that I was. I get to come here and create whoever I want to be. And so I came here and I said, I want to learn 2 things. This is controversial to people because it's not politically correct, but I'm going to do it anyway because I love you, Sean.
Well,
I'm going to reveal this, but I said,
you're safe here.
Thank you. I said that I had 2 objectives when I got here freshman year. I was going to learn how to drink beer, and I was going to learn how to talk to the prettiest girl in the room. Now, if I've told this story from stage, and people have said, "Oh, that's so cute. That's so great. That's everything." It's like, no. First of all, I went to every fraternity rush party I could find, and I'd go down, and I would stand by the beer, the keg or whatever, pour beer out, stand by the keg, and I don't know if you can identify with Sean. I'd ID the person in the room that I was going to talk to. And inside of me was this huge, like, don't do this. It's the worst thing. You're going to die. It's going to be the stupidest thing that happens. And then you walk across the room and all your fears come true. You walk across the room, you fumble on your words, you sound like an idiot. They laugh and giggle at you. You walk away, you go home, and you cry yourself to sleep. And then that was Friday. Saturday, you wake up, you go to another fraternity party, you go stand by the keg of beer, you ID who you're going to go talk to, you walk across the room, and you do it again. And again, and again, and again. And so, no, that wasn't fun. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't cute. There's a lot of crying myself to sleep at nights. But I got better. I got better and better. And then it became like this test of courage. And that's where I sunk, that all that who went into getting these good grades and working so hard, I was like, this I'm going to figure out. I'm going to get an A in this. So I would walk across the room. So by the end of the semester, I would walk across the room confident. How I walked was different. How I stepped into it was different. How I talked to the people were different. And I could talk to them. Now, that sounds, I don't know, in today's political correct world, it sounds like targeting. It sounds like whatever. It's like, no, it was all about me. It was just like I was overcoming my own fears. What I learned from that is that from that moment on, I could talk to anybody in any room. I had overcome my biggest fear. So I could talk to anybody in any room. Now, from that moment on, I could talk to professors. I could talk to famous people. Later in my career, I could talk to CEOs of Fortune 100 companies and be calm about it because they were the prettiest girl in the room. And, I've done that, been there. And so that fear just didn't rise up to shut me down. I wouldn't let that shut me down. Today, people say, Patrick, you're such a natural storyteller. Oh, Patrick, you're a natural speaker. It's like, no.
Yeah.
This is a craft. This is learned. And so my to end that story, part 2 of that story, is our self-talk about who we are. That's a decision you make in any moment. In any moment, you get to break that if you want.
Yeah.
And so that's the moral of that story. It really is, personality traits. Yeah, I get it. They are very strong, but you can change them. You can change how you show up. You can change a lot of the things. Part 3 of the story. Okay, are you okay with part 3 of the story?
Yes, I am hooked. So yeah,
Okay.
continue.
So it's interesting. So I was at an event where Daniel Amen spoke. Daniel Amen is one of the lead guys on brain research. And I was in the first row when he was teaching, actually, in this big event. The kind of events those are, right? It was a Brendan Burchard event. And I was in the first row.
Nice.
And every time Dr. Daniel Amen came across the stage, I swear he was looking at me. I was like, when you're a speaker, you target somebody in the audience. I know that now. I was his target on that side of the stage. So every time he came across, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, dude, stop looking at me. What is that about? And so, of course, that's a hook, right? So at the end of this, he's saying, well, come to one of my clinics and get a brain scan. I was like, okay, I'll go do a brain scan. And they're pricey, but I was like, I want to learn about my brain because I care about my personal development. And what better way to look at, who you are and what you are than study the brain where everything rattles around it. So I went to Bellevue, Washington, flew there and did this brain scan. 3 days of testing they do.
Wow.
And on the third day, you go talk to this guy was a neurologist and a psychiatrist that study the brain and neurology. I was like, this is great. So I walk in and he's got my file open and he's looking at this, just the brain scan, right? Just what's there. And he said, you were shy at once and overcame that, right?
Whoa.
Well, like, how did you see that on that picture? And then he described it. He said, there's a part of your brain that how shy you are or anything is sits. And I think I don't know if I have this right, but on the left side, there was you could see on the brain scan, just a slight dip in how they analyzed the results of that. So there's a slight dip on the left side, but it looked like it was kind of filled in. So there was this dip and it was kind of filled in. And he said that dip indicates shyness. But it also shows that the blood flow over lots of time, that you've forced the flow of blood through that part of your brain. So it looks like, it's repaired.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, now I'm all in now. And so I'm just like, tell me more about me. So it was just amazing to see that kind of results. Again, I look at this and I go I changed the flow of blood in my brain over a long period of time through the right habits that changed who I am.
Yeah.
Man, you get to wake up every morning and say, who am I? And you get to live into that. That's core of that story. Okay, 3 parts of that story. I never told all 3 parts at one time. That's good.
Oh, thank you for sharing it with everyone listening.
Yeah.
And that's super cool. And also, as a Purdue graduate, I'm not sure if my audience actually knows. I haven't talked about school too much yet. I actually had a really similar experience to you of being introverted in high school, being invisible, but that was on purpose. Can't be a target. I was the quiet kid that could get along with all the different tribes.
Mm,
jocks, the AP kids, punk
mm,
rockers, and all that stuff. Um, but nobody really like. I had a core group of friends. Nobody really knew me, and my I knew that going to Purdue, I would need to get out of my shell if I was going to make any type of friends and survive because all my crew was going to other places. And so, with I had a friend that was part of this like theater thing. They were doing a coffee club where you do poetry or music, and I
mm.
absolutely love music. And with 3 months of guitar lessons, not being able to hold a tune, I agreed to get up on stage in front of like 50 of my peers, and I'm like, this like paralyzes me with fear when I consider it. I just one don't think about it till you're up there, right? That was my I'll avoid it until it happens. But I also knew that doing this would help me push me in a way where I would be like I wanted to be the mayor of Purdue. Like that was the mentality I was going in, leaving senior year of high school, and so I like did a terrible job with these songs that I didn't think anyone knew. But there was one person I remember with the lights on the stage, like I could see him singing along to this song I thought was obscure and like digging it, and I'm like, oh, like people want you to succeed.
Mm,
And
mm.
so anytime I had that crushing fear of somebody like they don't want you to look like a fool, like they'll try to help you out unless you really biff it. And I did my fair share of really biffing it over the years. But most people like understand like, oh, you're just a little nervous, and we'll help you along. So, um, and I perfected that skill at Purdue also.
Yeah.
So very really thankful to that organization, that the college for helping me experiment socially. I guess I don't know.
It's so good, and I'm teaching career readiness to sophomores right now,
Oh, awesome.
and they're so focused on getting uh, summer internships next summer. That's the big thing. And I literally, I have 3 degrees from Purdue, and I literally tell them, I'm like, look, at the end of this thing, if you walk away with a piece of paper, you missed the learning environment that's here.
Mhm.
And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, look, my degree says BS, my chemical engineering, Patrick Mosher, Purdue. It doesn't have my GPA on it. It doesn't say anything else. That's the piece of paper. Great. That's a ticket to the game. Yes, that's great. That's great. That's great. But when you leave Purdue or any place, any major experience like that, leave with a story.
Mhm.
And I'm telling them over and over again, what's your Purdue story? And they're like, what? I'm
So
like,
good.
right, because it's what you just said. It's like your Purdue story isn't like, well, when I took physics 251 on week 10, there was this great problem that I got to solve, and I feel really good because I got 100% on that quiz point. It's like that's not your story when you leave Purdue or
Yep.
or any event. You know, the story is I got up in front of 50 people and I played guitar. Your story is my story of I actually got invited to 3 of the fraternities. I turned them all down. But that's my
Wow.
story.
Yep.
That's a part of the story. Um, that's what you leave with. And you know what? The end of life, you've done your job. I was in consulting for 28 and a half years. Yep, I delivered a lot of projects, delivered a lot of PowerPoint decks, delivered a lot of solutions to clients. I had a lot of meetings. If you ask me, what happened on these projects, you know what I'm remembering? I remember the people.
Mm.
I remember the stories. And that's what you take with you. As you go through life, you string together these pearls of amazing stories. That's what you remember. That's why storytelling and story crafting is so important. You're in a story right now.
Mhm.
How would you tell that story? Well, it's not worth telling. It's like, oh, every story is worth telling if you're good at story crafting.
Yep.
Anyway, so good.
And I think that leads really nicely into the next phase of the podcast. And like, what number one, like, where do you think most people get wrong in telling their story? Like, I think
No.
number one is not believing that people are interested in it, but we are
Yeah.
wired, I think, at a very primal level to once upon a time, you're like, oh, I know this, but what's your twist on it? You know, like,
Yeah. Yeah. What do people get wrong in stories? You name the first one is I don't have a story worth telling. My story's not interesting. I think people get wrapped up in that. You can tell a great story about a very mundane thing. But you have to have the story crafting skills to do it. So I think where people get wrong is that I don't have a story worth telling. Everything in my life is mundane. Um, Another part about that is that I'm not special. My experiences aren't special. And I get that with these sophomores here. Like, well, I don't have a great story to tell, interviewers. I'm like, the string of decisions that you made to get to this institution are unique to you. And it's special because you grew up in your family. You grew up with your parents either pushing you towards this or pushing you to something else. Those are all amazing stories. And it's your superpower that's coming through. And so, by the time, I don't know, by the time you're 15, you've got a string of stories of decisions that you've made in your life that are unique to you and no one else, because no one else had your mom and dad. No one else had your mom and dad who were either like incredibly supportive of everything you did, or like were really tough and, strict, or were passive aggressive, or whatever they were, right? Everybody has their own story. So it is unique. You just don't think it's unique because it's your story. Wait, back up. It's your story. That's what makes you unique. So I think that's a huge part, is that people think that their story is not, helpful. I'd say, by the time, and I don't know the demographics of your podcast, but I'll put it here. When you get to your early to mid 30s, by that time in your life, your career, you've made a number of career choices. When you first leave high school or college, when you get into the professional life, as an entrepreneur even, any of those things, the first things you do, they're not it. And you realize, oh, that's not it. And then you make an adjustment. And I just taught this today in class today. You make these course adjustments. They're course adjustments. There's it's like these big dials on the side of your career, instrument going like, avoid that. Oh, I didn't realize that. And then by the time you're in your mid 30s, you're kind of using finer tuned course adjustments on this. And it's about that time where the world is recognizing, oh, this person's special. And you're realizing that, hey, I've got this thing. And it's about that time where you have a self-realization that, wait a minute, I've got a thing that nobody else has. And you start leveraging that equity, that brand equity you have consciously. And that's a powerful time in your career. And at that moment, man, if you have stories about who you are and what your superpower is, it's gold. So I'd say that's the second part. It's not worth saying, but I'd even lift that further. It's like, what is your superpower? How do you define it? How do you describe it? And this isn't entirely true, but I put it to your audience this way. It's like, if you can't articulate your superpower, guess what? No one else can either. So, figure out what that looks like. Now, that's not entirely true, because sometimes other people can say, Sean, this is what you're really good at. I was like, no, I'm not good at that. It's like, no, you're really good at that. I was like, well, no, I'm not really good at that. Stop saying no. Yes, thank you. I'm good at that, because you are. So I've asked, oh, this is so good too. I've asked uh, 3 words that I've asked 50. I did this a couple years ago. I asked 54 people, clients, family, friends, give me 3 words that describe me as my best self. It's a great exercise. Hopefully, I'm giving people snippets of challenges to go out and do as a part of the suit. Go out and ask. I asked 54 people. I'm a nerd, so I have a list of people, and I put it on a spreadsheet so I could analyze the results. And so I put it on a spreadsheet, and I have 3 words that I say, oh, this is my best self. So part of it was the hypothesis was like, well, people are going to say this is who I am, my best self. Only one of the 3 words turned up to be common across most of the people. Only one. And I was totally surprised at the word that came up most often. That I literally was like, I had to check the results again. I was like, really? The word that came up most often was compassionate.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm not a compassionate person. Oh, self-talk. Shut up. You now have data that says you are a compassionate person. So shut off that self-talk, because it's true. You're a compassionate person. But I would never use that to describe myself. It's like, wow. And, so that was fascinating to me about people could see what your superpower is. Ask them, put it together. And then when you start looking at that, it's like, what are my stories where I show compassion? What are my stories of what I love? One of the words that I had on my list is, authentic. I'm an authentic guy. And so, and that was the one word that many of the people did say was true. And I was like, what are my stories of authenticity? And when you tell a story of authenticity, it's not like, well, Patrick's just an authentic person. No. You tell a story where your authenticity is challenged. You tell a story of where it's so easy to sweep something under the rug and be a little bit inauthentic just to make the situation easier. And you choose not to do that. Tell those stories. And you know what? If somebody tells you that you have this as one of your 3 words that's really strong, then what's the story around that? Yeah. My favorite, that person said, I asked for 3 words. And usually I think of those 3 words. And one person said, I think you'll appreciate this. They said, legendary Jedi Master. Awesome. I accept those 3 words. At least for that person, it was so good. But it's a great exercise to do. So that's what people get wrong, is they don't accept their superpower, and then they can't think of stories that are relevant to that. Stop it. You have a superpower. You're an adult human being.
Yeah.
You made a set of decisions that got you where you are, and you've gotten certain kinds of success because you've guided yourself there with these decisions. That's who you are. What is that superpower? And then tell stories around it. Okay.
It's so powerful. And I'm putting myself back sophomore year at Purdue, wishing I would have had this advice, because it took me a little bit longer to kind of realize I do have a superpower. My stories aren't tied up in my GPA. I fell into that trap. And so it is such powerful advice, no matter where you are in your life, I think, but especially as a sophomore in college.
It's so good. So here's the thing that over years that have changed, I believe, is that when I graduated from college, to your point, I'm a tail end baby boomer. And so credibility had to do with leadership roles and this and that and everything else. And then you'd go into your interviews and go like, this is how I did everything great. And this was great. And that was great. And I'm great. And so give me a great job. And that, that's how it was. Right. And it's just like, and that was what success was decades ago. Mm-hmm. That's what credibility is. Today, I'd like to think, and I know this is true, that we've evolved. And so that is not credibility these days, all your accomplishments and all those things. Honestly, credibility these days comes with vulnerability. And so I was talking to one of these sophomores, and came to office hours, and he said, Professor Mosher, I love that, Professor Mosher. It's so weird to me. Professor Mosher, I want to tell a story in my job interviews for summer. So I wanted to bounce off the story I would tell. I was like, great, tell me the story. So this is what I heard of the story, Sean. He said, so a friend of mine and I, last Christmas, were selling Christmas trees. And we hit a glitch in the operation of how we were going to do this. And then this is what I heard. Blah 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 blah. Success, 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 success. And we sold a lot of trees. And he said, how was that? And I said, it sucked. And he said, what? Like, this is a terrible story. I was like, I know the business school is telling you that's the right story. But you know what? The business school is a bunch of people my age telling you what that story is, what that story should be. And these days, we're not the ones interviewing people. People interviewing them are people that are fresher and newer in their careers, not me. They said, well, what story would you tell? And I was like, Christopher, his name was Christopher. I said, Christopher, I want you to think about a time in the last 3 months where you cried about school. And he said, I said, do you have one of those? He goes like, yeah. It's like, okay, tell me that story. He's like, well, I got 2 months ago, I was taking accounting, and I got a 56% on the first test. And I was flunking. I was going to flunk out of this class. And I just felt so bad about it. And I called my mom and my dad, because we don't live, in Indiana. We're out of state. And so I called them up, and they were so disappointed in me. And they were angry with me. And I got off the phone. Gosh, I'm almost coming to tears. And I got off the phone, cried. On Saturday morning, I woke up and I said, no, this isn't going to happen. I am going to study every day for the next accounting test, every day until the next test in like 3 weeks. So I called up my mom and dad. My dad was there. I said, Dad, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen this way. And his dad said, okay, I just want you to know one thing, son. What's that? It's like, he said, I just want you to be better than me. First generation. They're first generation. So his dad came over, an immigrant. He said, I just want you to be better than me. And so Christopher said, so, and I was like, no, stop there, Christopher. How did that make you feel? And he said, oh, my dad's so awesome. It's an impossible expectation. How can I be better than my dad? So I felt like this was an impossible mark, an impossible expectation. I felt like I was in this chasm, this precipice. And I also felt like angry at myself for not doing so well. And I felt defeated and fearful. I felt all those things at once. I was like, great. Now what'd you do next? He said, I studied every day for the next accounting test. And in 3 weeks, I got an 87%.
Wow.
I said, congratulations. You probably just ruined your 4.0 at Purdue. And he's like, oh, I know. And I was like, you know what? And this was, he was a freshman at the time of the story. I said, so if I were interviewing you for a consulting job and you had a 3.89 and you had one B that was freshman year accounting, I'm telling you, I would want you to tell the story you just told me. He's like, why? I said, because in that story, when I hire at accounting or at Accenture, what you just explained to me is when I do something wrong, I escalate it to supervisors. I let them know that I messed up. You resolve yourself to do better. You have the perseverance and the grit to do better. And then, and you feel it. You have an emotional feel, and you're coachable. I love people who graduate that are coachable. And then you nail it at the tail end. Those 4 qualities, I would hire every day to be a good consultant. It's not the 4.0 that matters. It's the resilience. It's the coachability. It's the vulnerability. It's all those things. He's like, wow, I didn't think about that. So that was the coaching I gave him to say, that story is so powerful. Tell that one. Yeah. So I think credibility comes with vulnerability. People want to hear the mistakes that were made. I bet your podcast people, are listening to this. What they don't want to hear, me say, well, Sean, I had it all figured out from the start. Yeah. I was successful from the start. I did everything right, and I was very successful. They'd go like, Sean, what numbnuts did you just bring into your podcast? People don't want to hear that story. And these are the 3 important components of telling a good story.
Oh,
is
you've read into my next question, so
there you go. Is there's a struggle. Start with a struggle. Christopher's story started with, I got a 56% on an accounting test. That draws you into the story. It's like, oh, and you feel for the protagonist. It's like, and what's really cool about that story, I mean, you could do a movie on that story, on getting a D on a test or flunking a test. How many people have done that? But how he told the story was, so powerful. So how many people out there have failed at something? Everybody, right? So it's like, okay, so there's a common mark with that story. So it starts with the struggle. What's the struggle? I talked about the movie earlier on in the podcast. It's like you open up with, a woman in a wheelchair. Okay, how'd she get there? What'd she do about that? Your brain just goes like, I need to know more about this story. Start with the struggle, and start with a struggle that many people can identify with. I think of it as, yes, I'll say it. It's start with a very low reference point. Lower than people in your audience have for themselves, or common to the people in the room that they have for themselves. They go like, I got a 56%. What's the lower reference point than failing something? Everybody's got that as an experience. And so that's the first part, struggle. And then there's a search. It's the, this is so Joseph Campbell, the heroic journey. It's like, then there's the quest for the Holy Grail. It's like, and there's dragons to slay, and there's mountains to climb, and I fell down and skinned my knee, or fell down the side of the mountain, or whatever. So people want to hear there was a struggle, and then things were hard. And so in the way are these obstacles, the dragons to slay. And as you tell that part of the story, people go like, I can identify with those. Yes, I've had that obstacle. I get it. But also what's happening in that story is that they are you. You're a protagonist. They want you to win. And they're going like, I want him to win because I'm in the story. If you're a good storyteller, people are in your story. There's like, I want to make you win because I want to win. So the struggle is like, and this happened, and we overcame this, and we did this. And what you're telling them is there's a process. There's a process of going through getting to the success. And in the end, there's a solution. There's an end result. Maybe it's the Holy Grail. Maybe I was mean by telling you, I was like, congratulations, you just ruined your 4.0. But he was like, yeah, I did. I said, but that's, you got so much better of a pearl of wisdom out of that. than all the rest of the A's that you could get.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, if that's the one course you got to B on or a C on in your whole college graduate program, when I'm looking at your transcript, I can tell you A1. I'm going to ask you about the C you got freshman year in accounting.
Yep.
Because it's the glitch. It's the chink in the armor. Why? Because credibility is where that's credibility is built through vulnerability these days.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see grit. People want to see resilience. They want to see coachability. They want to see adaptation. These are all words that are just like, that's what we want to see, which I think is an evolution from, I want to see success and win, 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 win. It's like, no, I don't want to see that. I want to see how you could do stuff. So struggle, search, solution. I think those are like the most important three components of, and I wouldn't say storytelling. I'd say that's a part of story crafting, how to build that story. So anyway, those are great storytelling. Struggle, search, solution.
I love that. And got the hamster wheel going on in my head on a bunch of stories I need to tell, and more in my business than I have been. So I do appreciate it. And I also think that intuitively, especially I would imagine in hiring, and that's a whole other subject, but seeing how people struggle is almost more important than the struggle. Like that's when I would hire for engineering teams. It was never about, like, anyone could do code, I believe, with enough experience. Like, it's the same stuff. There's problem solving and all that. But how did you handle the guy in the project that was mean to you? And the people that are like, nobody's ever mean to me. I'm like, I don't buy that, number one. And number two, that means you're going to be fragile when it happens. And we don't have time to pick you up and put the pieces back together. We need you to be able to, like, adapt quickly. So you're telling the story. I'm putting myself in the story, just like you had mentioned. That's the power of this. And that's so good. So good. I'm so, like, extremely, like, pumped about this. I was then curious, like, before we start wrapping up, and I feel like we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours, but
indeed we could.
Is there a mindset or belief that you have about story crafting that others don't have?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So, if I talk about story building and storytelling, struggle, search, solution, I look at story crafting as three pieces as well.
Okay.
And storytelling is the third component. And people, so much in our world is like, oh, Patrick, how do you do storytelling? I was like, back up. The first phase of good storytelling is what I call story sourcing. And source good stories. You have to realize when you're in a story.
Oof.
That's key. And then if you walk around with a sense that you're in stories, you'll be a much better storyteller. So let me give you an example of one of those. So very mundane situation. This is so good. My grandson was playing in a sandbox. It was a raised sandbox. So to hold the sand in, they had 2x6s boards, two of them nailed together to create the perimeter of the sandbox. Okay. And so in the sandbox, there were these two digging tools that you could play and dig, so kids like to play and dig these things up, and then it moves around and you could move the sand around. And my grandson was playing in one corner with a little one of those things. In the other corner, there was a bigger one. And there was another kid playing in that one. And so I could see him eyeing the other one. And so he's digging the thing and moving around. And then the other kid's parents came, and so the kid ran away with them. And so Eli stood up, and I was standing at the corner, one of the corners. So this other machine was catty corner to him. And I was sitting at the mid corner. And so Eli stood up and started balancing on the 2x6s, to go over to the other machine. And so he's coming, and right when he came by me, I said, Eli, it would have been faster if you'd gone across, directly to the other machine.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me, and he stopped. He looked at me and said, Papa, I didn't want to do it fast. I wanted to make it worth it. Okay, wisdom is anywhere. It's anywhere. I got story told. I got wisdom slammed by a 7-year-old. It was so good. And he walked over there and sat down to the other thing, and I was like, dang. Okay. You know what, Sean? I can't tell you how many times I've told that story. But it's mundane.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mundane moment. But because I love story crafting, when that happened, so many people would go like, oh, wow. And then, boop, they move on. I was like, no. This is a story. Story sourcing is going like, I just have I need to tell the story over and over again. Why? Because here's this old dude, me, who's, like, oh, Patrick, you must have all these great stories. It's like, no, I got wisdom slammed by my grandson. That's awesome. Story sourcing. These great stories are anywhere, in even the most mundane things. Mm-hmm. But if you see how I told the story, there was this machine on the other side, struggle. There's a search, he was walking across. Solution, oh, Papa, I didn't want to do it fast. I wanted to make it worth it. How many times do we go from point A to point B, but we don't make the path of the journey worth it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, sometimes the path between A and B is more important than A or B. He knew that. So good. So story sourcing is knowing that you're in a story. And boy, when you know you're in a story, I have a story inventory. Again, I'm a nerd, so I have an Excel spreadsheet with stories listed on them. And literally, and for your audience, that spreadsheet has the story name, and it has in it struggle, search, solution. And I write those in there. And it's a story inventory. And when I'm asked to do something big, I look at the story inventory and go like, what story would be relevant for this group? Okay, so people go like, you're such a natural storyteller. It's like, oh no, I'm a story crafter because I literally think about what story is relevant. I think about that ahead of time. Yeah, some stories are extemporaneous. Some stories I do from the hip. But a lot of my stories are off that inventory, and I think about that ahead of time. So good. So story sourcing is so big. The second part is story building. So story building is what I just described too. It's like, if I know that I'm in a story, then the story build is the simplest form of that is write down the story. What's the theme? If you're going to say what the theme is, what's the one-liner? And maybe the one-liner from the story from my grandson, Eli, is, I want to make it worth it. Mm-hmm. What a great story title. But then what's the struggle, search, and solution? And fill that in. That's story building at plus form. And then now that you've done the story sourcing, you've done the story building, now you're ready to tell the story. Here's the last piece of this that I'll share with you. And again, I've taught lots of this stuff for hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to sip it here. But I tell my sophomores, I said, hey, you have a resume, right? And they're like, yeah. I want you to look at your resume, and every bullet point on your resume is a story. I want you to be able to tell every bullet point story in 20 seconds, 2 minutes, and 30 minutes. So if you have stuff on there that's a resume filler, guess what? I can smell those in interviews. You know how that goes. Like, I was president of the accounting club. It's like, okay, I'm going to ask about that. So, Sean, tell me about the president of the accounting club. And you're like, well, it really wasn't that active. And I'm like, you're out.
Yeah.
Right. What if the answer is like, tell me about this being president of the accounting club? Oh, it wasn't very active, but I really wanted to make it something. I wanted to learn. So when I started it, It hadn't been there for years. And then I got a few people together. It was 5, and then it was 10. Then we had these meetings at the end. I was like, okay, now there's a story. Yeah. So everything on on your resume, everything should have like a 20-second snippet story, like an elevator speech story. It should have like a 2-minute story that you can tell in an interview. And then there's the long story that you could tell around a campfire, right? That you go like, let me tell you a story. And then, so the stories can get longer and more sensory and more stuff in it. So that's what I think story crafting is. That's what makes a good storyteller. But a lot goes into that. Like any craft, it's a craft. It's not just tell me the skills of being a good storyteller. It's like, starts way long before that. Okay, there's my answer.
I love that. For me, like the big like mind blowing thing is like, like the belief that you're in a story, and just training your mind to be like, okay, like you're living your story right now. Remember this because this could be something special for someone else that gets them that breakthrough as a coach, or as just connecting with people around the campfire. That might be the title of this episode of the podcast because I think it's so good. So that belief or mindset, it's different. If someone was to get started in becoming a better storyteller, of going from, I would say we're all probably beginners because it comes natural as a human, but how would you maybe, if people wanted to get more intentful and more focused, is it the 3 steps of believe you're in a story, craft it, and then tell it?
Yeah.
Or is there something else?
Absolutely. Hey, I'll go back to my story of talking to the prettiest girl in the room.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey, the first time you do it, it's gonna be awful. Hey, it's your story of being on stage. It's like, yeah, it's awful. Everything in your being, your ego is saying, shut it down. Wrong thing to do. Never do that again because you got so embarrassed. You need to protect me, the ego. So stop it. And you got to go like, no, you need to be quiet right now. And I'm going to go embarrass myself again and again and again. So if you go like, I'm not a good storyteller. Okay, fine. Then don't be. I'm not a good storyteller, but I want to be. Okay, now we got work to do. Because then you need to lean into it and build your stories and get better and better at it. How I thought about that early in my career. Oh, this is so good. Another story. So early in my career, I did change management work.
Okay.
And I watched early in my career, I watched people pitch, change management work to clients, the importance of it, the benefits of it, that kind of thing. And, it was just so conceptual and frameworks and then I heard the circular logic, why should we do change management? Well, it's good for your people. Well, why is it good for your people? Well, because, your people really like it. Well, why will they like it? It's because it's good for them. It's like, what do we do? No. And I just watched this happen over and over again. I was like, this isn't working. So I said, okay, so if I ever get asked, what's the value of change management work? Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, my BS is in chemical engineering. So I wasn't a typical liberal arts guy doing change management. I have an engineer's like, break it down into its pieces and parts. Let's make this go. I'm an analytic geek. So I'm not going to go through how I used to sell it, but I was like, if I get good at this and I can sell a significant piece of work or convince somebody to do this work in an hour, that's great. So if I'm asked to do a change management presentation to a client in an hour, and I can do a compelling story in an hour where they come back and they go like, we want you to do this work, whether it's selling the work or just doing the work or whatever, but if the importance of this, or like, this is the importance of it. Give me a team of 3 people to do this. So there's money, there's resources, there's budget involved in this. That's the true, did I tell the story in a compelling way where resources flowed? So, and then I started doing that. It was like, okay, I started making that work. as I said earlier, it's like early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I started making that work. And then I realized, and this is the key part of this, what if I could do that in 30 minutes instead of 60? So then I was like, and I think about this as like a tinfoil ball, right? If I can squeeze that ball down, and really just kind of crush it, if I could do that in 30 minutes, I'm going to be a much better professional. Think about stories the same way. If I can tell a really compelling story and take it and do it in 30 minutes and sell an idea, great. So I did that. I got good at that. And I was like, what if I could do that in 15? Squeeze that ball down, And now you're rolling that tinfoil ball on the table because you're really trying to squeeze that thing down. And it took a few years. And I could do that. And I was like, okay, now I can do this. Now I'm able to tell this a really compelling story, this thing that moves people in 15 minutes. And then the end of the story, we were doing a pitch for, I think it was a $12 million piece of work at a client. Mm-hmm. And it was a 2-hour pitch. And there was like 8 from our team that was pitching the work. And as usual, the change management piece was last. And so all my other colleagues that were doing the technology piece and the process pieces and all that stuff and the industry pieces, they were all going overtime. Mm. And I was looking at this, I was like, I'm not going to get 20 minutes on the back end of this. It's not going to happen. And I watched my time crunch like this tinfoil ball. This isn't going to happen. Now, this was, at the time, this was a Fortune 23 company. Mm. This is like major bucks. And how this was shaped, the room was shaped, is that the consultants it was a U-shaped room. The consultants were sitting on the U, and the clients were in the middle of the room. And the CEO was dead center. Mm. CEO of a Fortune 23 company. I mean, so, like intimidating. And then they literally said, okay, Patrick, you're up. 8 minutes.
Wow.
And we weren't winning. I don't know if you know how that is, but you can feel it in the room. It's like, we aren't winning. And I took a deep breath. And I made in that decision, in that moment, I was like, this room's going away. This is a conversation with me and the CEO. So I walked to the front of the room and I looked at Dave in the eyes and I said, Dave, I'm going to talk to you about change management. But you know what? Here's the thing. The thing that you care about the most about this major transformation is that your people aren't going to buy in. Mm-hmm. This thing that you built, this carefully crafted thing that you've built over 12 years of your career, it's your baby. It's this thing that's in your hand. And now we're talking about changing everything. And all you can think about is how we're going to break everything. This carefully crafted, beautiful ship that you've built. My job is to hold the people together, to keep your crew from jumping. So let me tell you, how we're going to do that. And I spent 6 minutes going through a very simple methodology. And he said, that's great. We won the work. Wow. And I got named in the contract. It's like, you guys won the work. Patrick Mosher has to be dedicated to this project 100% of his time.
Wow.
They're like, okay, where'd that come from? It's like, Dave wants you. And so I learned how to crunch that little ball into an 8-minute snippet to win $12 million worth of work. Hey, that's the power of storytelling. There it is right there. So if you're not good at storytelling, keep working at it. And you know what? Oh, Patrick, that's a great story. Yeah, it took me 17 years to craft my story to get to that place. So work on it. It's a craft. Any craft, you get good at it over years, not times.
Yeah.
So there's my story.
Awesome. So thank you for sharing that story, all the wonderful stories on today's podcast. I have a couple of pages of notes here just for myself that I'm going to need to listen again to just really focus in on. I absolutely love this topic. It's something I've been crafting and working on in a while. Having again overcome like my story's not important. It's like no, like you need to get over that and like for me, it's like how can this serve and help people out in the world. And I think storytelling is such a powerful act of service in sharing your knowledge, you know, and sharing what you've experienced and learned. So, I guess like the only thing left to ask you is if people wanted to follow up or connect with you on social media or on the web or whatnot, where would be the best place for people to follow you?
Oh, that's so good. Thank you. So, my business is called Wisdom for Humanity, and I got it on my shirt here, Wisdom for Humanity.
Right on.
By the way, another story, but I'm not going to tell you. But my daughter designed the logo. So,
cool.
She's a graphic artist. It's kind of modeled after the Book of Kells. But anyway, Wisdom for Humanity. You can find my website at Wisdom for Humanity. And then you can get into all my goodies there of what I'm doing. And I have a weekly blog post, so you can go there and subscribe if you want to. And I send out, I think about this way. It's a blog post, but it's weekly wisdom. It's like, take this conversation and boil it into like a 2-minute read every week. I always have a wisdom challenge in there. I always have some quotes. The whole point of exchanging wisdom is to give people these wisdom packets so that they change how they do their work, how they live their lives. So that's our weekly. So you can go out there, subscribe. Also out there, I have a monthly program that we talk like this, a little shorter than this, but it's called Significant Impact Monthly. Fondly, I call it SIM. And so Significant Impact Monthly is, and I have 2 forms of that. I have a master class, which is videos of me teaching, but I have an interactive where I get on Zooms like this every month with folks. And we talk about topics. I'll usually teach for a little bit like we did today, but then there's an opportunity to do Q&A and say, how can I, like today's story, if I was doing story crafting, it'd be like, I want to tell this story in this situation. How would I craft that story differently? Like, oh, well, let's talk about how to do that. So I have that interactive program as well. So you can find those on my website as well. And then I'm out on social media. Just look at, go out to YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. Go look up Wisdom for Humanity. I have lots of stuff out there. Sean, up front, you asked about every year I go to a sacred place on the planet. So Pastor went to Delphi, Greece. The pandemic stopped us a little bit, but we went to Machu Picchu, Peru. We went to Glendalough, Ireland. And so I have snippets of those things in my YouTube channel. So you can find little snippets of the teachings from there. So in that sense, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm easy to find.
Oh, right on. I will have links to everything you've mentioned below just to help get the word out to folks. I could listen to you talk about Delphi and Machu Picchu and all of those events. Like, I think I already have like hours logged just from, our interactions outside of this podcast. And it's so fabulous. I encourage everyone to check out Patrick's YouTube channel. It is also fantastic. Been getting into a lot of your videos recently. So thank you for sharing your stories and knowledge with us. I'd love to have you back on the podcast at some point because like we had talked about before, this could have very easily been a 3-hour plus episode. And I would be totally fine with that. Maybe we could plan for a longer form or something, but
that's so good. Maybe we get around the fire someplace and really like literally and do that and just like get a group of people and just like talk about around the campfire for hours and hours. That'd be awesome.
That would be amazing. So let's figure it out.
So let me leave you with this. The last thing I'll put out there with you is Wisdom for Humanity is what I do. And my life mission, everybody should have a life mission. We should talk about that sometime.
Yeah.
But my life mission at this point in my life is to build a better world for future generations. I'm not in it for me. I have 2 daughters. They're doing fine in the world. One of my daughters has 3 kids, so I have 3 grandkids. You know what? She's a great mother. So in that way, I get to give back. I don't have, these urgent needs that are yanking me into things, which that is lots of people's life missions, so I get to give back. And so when I think about wisdom and building a better world for future generations, exchanging our stories, but in those stories are these wisdom gems. And exchanging wisdom is probably the most important thing we can do from cradle to grave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we change future generations, change the trajectory that young people are on. So in the end, what Wisdom for Humanity, the importance of it is that wisdom isn't something somebody has. Wisdom really isn't wisdom until it's shared. And that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's such a beautiful sentiment, and it is part of my personal meaningful revolution is getting this information, positive information out that uplifts people and lights them up in their pursuit of whatever important and fulfilling to them. So, we nailed it today, man. I'm so excited and thankful for our conversation today. So, with that said, Patrick, again, check below in the show notes for all the links to connect with Patrick. Start crafting your stories. I think we all could be better storytellers, and that alone could have a really positive ripple effect out there in the world, folks. So, with that said, thank you again, Patrick Mosher, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Sounds good. We will.
Yeah. So, what a fantastic discussion with Patrick. I hope you're like me and you had your journal out and took pages of notes like I did throughout this podcast, because there's so many good things about the power of stories in different contexts, and how it really helps, communicate and share information and spread good ideas. I guess it could spread bad ideas too, but the whole idea of this podcast is to do things that we find meaningful. And it's pointless to do meaningful things if you can't share that with the people around you. You can't tell stories about why you do the meaningful things that you do. And that's one of the things that I hope to focus on going forward more with the podcast. That's one of the big takeaways I had. But I'd love to hear your takeaways. So please leave a comment. Please, if you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, that helps me out. Leave a comment with a question. If I can't answer it, or if it's for Patrick, I can get it to him and get the answer back to you guys. But so again, I'm so excited and stoked to be able to share this conversation with you and highlight my friend Patrick, because that guy is awesome. I really respect his career, but he's helped me a lot in my business just as a mentor running in some of the same communities. So I'm very, very thankful for that. So thanks again, Patrick, for being on. Thank you for listening, and make sure to again, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with 3 of your friends. Get the word out, help the podcast grow, because we all want to be living into this world that we've designed for ourselves that's really meaningful and brings us, again, that sense of joy, that sense of confidence, that sense that we're making an impact and bringing the people around us along. So thanks, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.